In today's podcast, we're going to talk about processing the loss of emotional intimacy in your neurodiverse marriage. Today's conversation is going to be tender, and I want to approach it that way. If you're in a neurodiverse marriage, especially if you're the neurotypical wife, you've been carrying a quiet, private grief. Not because your ASD husband is cruel, and not because he doesn't love you, but because the emotional intimacy you expected isn't there in the way you had imagined. One woman said recently, "Intimate conversations are important to me, and I'm realizing my husband is not capable past the beginning state of our relationship." Now, that sentence carries grief. And today, we're not going to shame that grief. We're not going to minimize it, but we're going to process it. Because you can't build something healthy on top of unacknowledged loss. So now let's name the grief. We're going to start with something very foundational. You're not grieving your ASD spouse. You're grieving the marriage you thought you were entering. Many neurotypical wives describe this experience in language similar to what's often called Cassandra syndrome, which is, as most of you know, a pattern of chronic emotional deprivation, invisibility, and invalidation in relationships where one partner has ASD. Now, when your nervous system expected emotional reciprocity, shared processing, spontaneous validation, intuitive empathy, and instead it encountered logic, shutdown, defensiveness, or flat affect, something inside you collapses, and then grief follows. Not dramatic grief, not explosive grief, very quiet grief. The grief of, I thought we would talk for hours. I thought he would comfort me naturally. I thought he would grow emotionally with me. I thought marriage meant emotional partnership. Instead, you may feel like the emotional engine of the relationship. And here's what makes this grief complicated. Your spouse may genuinely love you, but love doesn't automatically equal emotional capacity. That gap right there between love and capacity is where your grief lives. Now let's talk about the 5 stages of neurodiverse marital grief. I want to walk you through this as a structured process. First, there is denial. You may have said in the denial phase, "Well, this is just stress," or "he'll grow out of it," or "if I explain better, he'll get it." In this stage, you overfunction, you educate, you overexplain, you coach, you accommodate, you walk on eggshells. You believe effort will solve a neurological difference, and your ASD husband has a neurological disorder. The second phase is anger. You may have said, "Why is this all on me?" Or "Why can't he just try?" Or "This isn't what I signed up for." Now, this is where resentment builds. And if you don't process it, it leaks out as sarcasm, criticism, and emotional withdrawal. The third phase of the grief cycle is bargaining. You may have said things to yourself, "Well, if I lower my expectations, maybe I'll be okay." Or "If I stop needing emotional intimacy, this might work out." This stage is dangerous because it involves shrinking yourself. And long-term self-shrinking turns into depression, which brings us to stage 4 in the grief cycle, depression. This is where many of you live right now, watching this channel. You finally come to the realization, this is not going to look the way I imagined. This is the stage that hurts the most. But guess what? Here's the good news. Because there's not an infinite number of steps, the next step is the healing step called acceptance. But hear me out. Acceptance is not resignation. It's clarity. It sounds like, okay, you know what? My husband may never initiate emotional processing the way I do, but I will decide how I want to live within that reality. Now that's empowered. Now let's look at a hard but necessary reframe. Let me say something corrective, gently, but clearly. If you're repeatedly escalating because he's not responding emotionally the way you want, escalation will not create capacity in your ASD husband. If you're raising the intensity, hoping to force intimacy, I promise you it will backfire. And if you're the partner escalating right now, pressing, demanding, confronting, let's pause. Your grief deserves some space. But intensity will only trigger defensiveness in an ASD nervous system, and you've lived it. Many autistic men experience emotional confrontation as a threat. And guess what? Threat leads to shutdown, literal thinking, defensive logic, and stonewalling. Not because he doesn't care, but because his nervous system is overwhelmed. So if you really want to change, escalation is not your tool. Regulation is. So let's get into that now. We're going to look at practical de-escalation tools. Let's get concrete. You ready? Okay. When tension rises, tool number 1 is the 90-second reset. You can say something along the lines of, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need 20 minutes to regulate. I'm not abandoning this conversation. Then actually regulate. Go for a walk, cold water on your wrists, slow breathing, no rehearsing arguments in your head, and then you return calmer. Tool number 2, use the one issue rule. Don't stack grievances. One issue, one example, one request. Overloading your ASD husband cognitively often looks like, well, he doesn't care. But it's actually processing overload. Tool number 3, translate emotion into behavior instead of, well, you're always emotionally unavailable. Try, when I share something vulnerable with you and your response shifts to problem solving, I feel alone. What helps me is one sentence of validation first. Now that's very specific, concrete, and behavioral. Tool number 4, scheduled processing. Spontaneous emotional intimacy may not happen, but scheduled check-ins can. For example, Sunday evenings at 7, we talk for 30 minutes. That's predictability, and predictability lowers defensiveness. Now let's look at boundaries that protect you. Grief work is incomplete without boundaries. But listen, a boundary is not, you need to become more emotional. No, a boundary is, I won't stay in conversations where I'm being mocked or dismissed. Or you can say, if we can't discuss conflict without shutdown, I'll pause the discussion until we can do so respectfully. Or you can even say, if emotional companionship remains absent long-term, I'll evaluate what I need to do to be healthy. Boundaries are about your behavior, not controlling his. Now here's something that may be difficult. If you chose to stay consciously. Not in protest, not in fantasy, not in constant comparison to a neurotypical ideal. Or leave consciously. But limbo, in other words, grieving without processing, that's going to hollow you out. Now let's talk about embracing the marriage you actually have. Now here's the hopeful part. When you stop demanding a neurotypical marriage from a neurodiverse partner, something shifts. You begin to notice loyalty, stability, predictability, intellectual companionship, shared routines, practical devotion. Now, that form of love may not be poetic or particularly romantic. It may be logistical. It may be consistent rather than expressive. You grieve what isn't there, yes, but you also assess what is. Maturity is holding both. Now, if you're grieving, that doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you human. You can love someone deeply and still mourn the emotional intimacy you had hoped for. And you can process that grief without punishing your ASD spouse for neurological differences. So here's what we talked about. Regulate, communicate concretely, set boundaries, accept reality, and choose consciously. That's emotional leadership. Now, if this resonates, share in the comments what stage of grief you feel that you're in right now. You're not alone in this, not even close, okay? Tens of thousands of other neurotypical wives are going through this. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. God bless. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.